So in teaching, I think the job is to help people see things differently. So here's an example from the last century. The last century, physical interactions became observable. In this century, interactions between people are coming observable. So as I'm looking at you and trying to see who Google Glass is actually recognizing here, I want to ask you, imagine everybody in your supply chain was wearing Google Glass. What would you do with that data? Everybody. Now, of course, there are privacy issues. It actually turns out that I'm violating right now Stanford University's policies because I'm recording without your consent. I would like to get a show of hands from you. Who thinks it's okay for me to record this here while I'm speaking? Okay. Who thinks it's not okay? Okay. In that case, I will just take my glasses off and use these non-recording glasses because you have some people who think it's not okay. Now, there's a company in New Zealand called Icebreaker. They didn't only put glass on their people, but they also put it in their sheep. It's called a ram cam. And when you buy a piece of Icebreaker, there is a barcode, BAH code, and that barcode tells you everything about what went into that garment. Fine-grained measurements about the fibers that finally made it into your closet here in Palo Alto. So these are just examples of what we call a world of big data. Now, big data has nothing to do with size. It's not the size that matters. It's what you do with it, they say. So it really is the mindset that even if we don't have the data, at some stage, if we just create the right incentives, we'll be able to get them. Data has been compared to oil. So people say data is the new oil, and what typically goes with it is this sort of supply chain inspired graph here, which says, well, we here have the production, we create the oil, we produce it. Then we have distribution, and distribution in the case of data, in most cases, is actually social. You distribute across your social graph. In marketing, you learn that it's about a factor of 5 that social distribution of information is more effective than the best segmentation there is around. Then we have this key thing here, the red one, which is refining data. So this quarter, I'm teaching a class on networks. And the last class, we talked about LinkedIn, how LinkedIn is an amazing data refinery. LinkedIn is not sneaking up behind you and sniffing the digital exhaust in order for doing funny things. No, you know perfectly well what it is that you're providing LinkedIn with. And then LinkedIn refines those data to help you make better decisions. Whether you are a recruiter, whether you're an employer, or whether you're an employee. So I would like to ask you, how has the balance of power shifted? And I would like you to think about 3 things. 1, employer, employee. 2, supply chain, supplier and buyer. And 3, citizen and government. So the standard lore goes that now that pesky employer, oh no, this is courtesy of business. I mean that lovely employer, he or she or they they could actually find out that picture which somebody snatched at me with Google Glass at 5 a.m. at the end up in San Francisco when I wasn't looking all that fresh. But equally well. If you think Glassdoor or other apps, you can find out what the history is of that individual you'll be working for. For example, if the work history of everybody who's worked for that person never exceeded 6 months, don't fool yourself. You won't make it beyond 6 months either. So it is not clear how that balance is shifting. Second example, the relationship between buyers and suppliers. I was invited about a month ago to speak in Bentonville, Arkansas, at a company, and I don't think I should mention the name, at their Big Data Day. And what we talked about there was how they allowed their suppliers visibility onto the shelves. So kind of like Google Glass, I mean over there, turned off now because of a couple of people, but like that whoever produces the content could see right onto the shelf, including what competitors are doing. I like you to think about it, thinking about the last panel, as an ecosystem, as a data ecosystem. Because this old world where communication was expensive, you remember why firms exist, people get Nobel Prizes for that within firm communication is cheaper than between firm communication. So that really has changed. So how is the balance of power shifting there? And the third one is more for maybe our lunch discussion, how the balance of power, think NSA, is shifting between the government and the individual. All right, data is the new oil, or is it the new soil, which doesn't get eaten up? Or is it the new nuke? So it depends on what you're optimizing for. So in my talk, I'll do 3 things. I'll talk a bit more about data sources and communication, about connecting things. Then I talk about what I call the equation of business, or what we used to call it at Amazon, the fitness function. And then I end with a few rules which I think are good starting points for dealing with big data. All right. So the new nuke. Germany divested out of nuclear energy because Germany weighs the, if you will, right tail of the distribution, the negative, so highly that the small probability really bad event is something which the government wants to avoid by not building further nuclear power plants. So if you engineer the supply chain to avoid strongly negative things, you do one thing. If you engineer it to move the average a little bit better, then you do different things. And like Silicon Valley, powered by the hope of being the next Google, if you're interested in the unlikely super positive event, you do yet other things. So when we are going, after talking about data, to write down these equations of business, which have like 500 terms, and where we think about the weights, which sort of is our way of expressing mission, vision, values, then we really have to boil down and think about what is it that we want. We live in this amazing world where we can actually create the transparency and where we can put weights, and we are accountable for the weights which we add. But I wanted to give another couple of examples about what I see is happening in the world. So if we look back to the 70s was the era of building computers. The 80s was about connecting computers. You remember that? When I used that in class, and I told them when I started here my PhD, and Jonathan Dorfman at Slack gave me a modem. The freshman looked at me and said, "What is a modem?" The 90s was about connecting pages. So we moved up in the stack, and that of course led to Google. Because Google didn't primarily care about connecting computers. They care about pages, and they use the information that somebody else is pointing at your page. And that meant that if lots of people are pointing at your page and nobody's pointing at my page, for some reason, even if the same words in your page and my page, your page must be better because other people actually use their Google juice or their goodwill or whatever to actually point to your page. Like everything, of course, a whole army of fraudsters come out of that. We'll visit that in a moment when we talk about fakes. The 2000s, what was the 2000s about? Connecting people. And the 2010s, connecting data. So what really matters is this connecting. Kevin Kelly, the founder of Wired, says so beautifully, we live in that amazing time where everything got connected, irreversibly so. So what I'm inviting you here is, after the initial question about what would you do if everybody in your supply chain was wearing Google Glass, now if everything was connected, what would you do with it? Now, glass, for some of us, is a useful thing when we can't remember who is this guy over there, where did we meet him, and it helps our memory out. But let's look at it from the perspective of Google. Why does Google basically give away such amazing pieces of technology? Google is a data refinery, right? So it's only as good as the data that go in. One thing we have learned in the last 10 years is $1 invested on data has much higher return on average than $1 invested on algorithms. So by now, equipping the world with sensors, with cameras, microphones, connecting it to GPS, now Google manages to measure out the farthest corner of the universe. So for example, I went to buy some fish yesterday, and it clearly said there, fresh fish. But Google knew from other people who were there the day before that that sadly looking halibut, that has been sitting there the day before and was looking probably just as sad. So that transparency, that you can't lie anymore, that insight that let Amazon fire its entire marketing department 10 years ago, because it's not about spinning things anymore. That, I think, is now reaching the entire world. Now, there are many questions. Privacy, for example, the people who are uncomfortable of, although you registered with your name, who are uncomfortable of me taking a video. So just to remember what I've been saying and who have been asking questions. So those are not the questions really which we're interested in here. I just want you to imagine what you would do with all the data. Here is my search history. I have to tell you, I'd rather die than actually have you look at every single of my 15,317 searches that Google has stored on its computer. So it tells you so much about a person, about their intent. Just as geolocation, I think, is super interesting. If you know, for example, it was in the board of a dating app, if you know that the relative distance between two people shrinks and then is consistent with 0 for a while, and then it increases again, and you do a histogram of how long the time is that is consistent with 0. It's a clearly bimodal distribution. So those people, where you ring the bell or they ring the bell, I'm sorry, you look different on your picture. I think it won't work out. And that is the mode basically consistent with 0. And then you have a distribution of how long people take to do it. Yeah. All right, so this is examples here about what we can learn about individuals. Now, I want to give an example of Amazon as a data refinery. And specifically, at Amazon, we have the goal to help people make better decisions. And that meant that we make it trivially easy for them to contribute data, to connect with each other, and to collaborate. Side remark. Palantir, a company in Palo Alto, is a data analysis company, and I'm through Founders Fund investor, full disclosure here. So Palantir has a very similar philosophy, that there's a data layer, then there's the layer where you can ask questions, very quick feedback. Then there's a layer of knowledge management, and on top is a layer of collaboration. So what's setting these new kind of pieces of software, data visualization, data interaction, SaaS services apart, is that it makes it easy for people to have a dialogue with the data, and it makes it easy for people to collaborate. So who of you has sent a spreadsheet around in the last month? That is terrible. Because that is a really very rudimental form of collaboration. So think, how can you actually change that? How can you truly collaborate? Rather than sending the supply chain up and down some spreadsheets around. How can you have data? How can you use data to make a difference? So what I want to tell you here is Amazon as an example, and specifically my love for it is the mobile. The mobile is the data collection device and also the data rendering device for this decade. Here is the app Amazon has, and there is something which says snap it. So you can scroll down, you can make a picture here of the water bottle, for instance, and Amazon will tell you what it is, what's in there. It will also tell you how much it might cost at Amazon, just in case you want to have it delivered. And if you're in San Francisco, then you can, of course, have Amazon Fresh, which brings it next morning, but that's just side information. What's in from a data strategy perspective? First, Amazon now gets real-life photos of like water bottles, which are very different from what the company under well-defined lighting condition provides you with. So it gets better over time. The more people use it, the better the system gets. It's different from some other websites, like the Nike shoes from last year might just no longer be in stock. But they still show up and saying, sorry, out of stock. That's getting worse. Whereas if you collect data the right way, if you build the systems that learn with data, I think you have a winner. Second perspective is Amazon knows where I am, because through that EXIF information, the geolocation of where I'm taking that picture is given. Amazon also knows what kind of water I like. I mean, I could fool it, of course, by taking lots of pictures of things I'm not interested in, but that doesn't really work economically. So that shows you here that it's more than just, getting into the, pants of the consumer with a mobile phone and having it vibrate when something exciting happens. No. What it really is, it is the data strategy that drives Amazon's thinking, that drives Google's thinking, that drives Facebook's thinking. Very quick one on how that changed over the last 10 years or so. The example I want to give is very simple. Amazon recommendations. Stage one, manual recommendations. People sit down, like in your marketing department, and figure out what things might be belonging together. Stage two, implicit data, that digital exhaust. Those things you can't avoid doing. So if Amazon shows you a book and you actually are curious about it, you can't do anything but click on this book as to put another book. And by doing so, you now get the collective intelligence of 100 million people helping you which books actually might be substitutes in the process of buying, or what might be complements if they end up in the same shopping cart. Explicit data, reviews. Think about supply chain. Who of you is comfy to have any worker post anything? And I tell you, Amazon wasn't comfy, the PR department wasn't comfy at the beginning when people were saying, any customer can write whatever they want to write. Whoa, they might be saying something bad. Yes. On average, Amazon makes $50 for the first review, which is posted for an item, good or bad. And those people were quiet very quickly. Another example of transparency is this search inside the book. The publishers came and said, whoa, people will not buy the book anymore. They will just look and it turned out 7% higher sales. if you actually have search, and they were quiet. So there are many, many, many of these stories where you just need to measure things, where you create transparency, et voila, it will adjust the right things. 4, situation. The situation you are in. Your mobile knows where you are. Your mobile knows, what your quality of your voice is, whether you're fresh, whether you're tired. So how can you use that to make better recommendation? And then finally, of course, the social graph. Connecting people and using social commerce to get things done. For this, we were looking for an example, but we weren't finding it. And that example was from a tomato farm in Northern California that I'd heard, where people who work together specify the inputs they need from other people. So if my job is to put tomato seedlings in the ground, I'm going over to Nathan and say, hey, Nathan, I need those tomato seedlings tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Otherwise, I'm just sitting there and have nothing to put in the ground. Very different social connection if Nathan knows that I'm sitting there without his seedlings, sadly waiting for them, as opposed to, oh, I'm just missing some random deadline to some anonymous output point. What's the value of all this data that's being created? The value of data is only the amount of degree that the data influence the decision. So if it doesn't have any impact on decision, then the value of the data is 0. I know many of you think, oh, the data Google has about me or Facebook, there must be so much value in there. Yes, there must be a pony in there. So those data really only make a difference if they influence a decision. So when you hear the next time someone tell you that their data is very valuable, ask them what decisions are influenced by those data. 3, focus on actions. I know many people here at GSB, they want to go to McKinsey or a consultancy where the output is PowerPoints, but nothing changes unless people act. So the beauty on the online world is that you can start with the action and you can measure the differential effect different inputs have onto the outcome which you define. So now let's talk about that outcome you define. And we call this a fitness function, or we call it the equation of business. Jeff Bezos and I probably spent 50 hours going from group to group at Amazon and working with them to figure out how do they want to be evaluated. Non-trivial. And we made many mistakes, and having a group by now of 1,000 very smart people, 100,000 people at Amazon. It's amazing. It was 1,000 when I was there. 100,000 people who are very smart and all optimized for whatever is put on their plate. You very quickly see if you have the wrong term in the equation. So I want to give you a couple of examples. 1, view-weighted availability. So if you come from the physical world, then you might just see how much is on your shelves. In the online world, it doesn't matter if 99.9% of your shelves are well stocked, if everybody wants to buy that 0.1% of items which you're out of. So the beauty here is that you know what people actually are interested in. So it's not just availability, but it's availability weighted by how many people want it. So that allows Amazon to finally make actions. For instance, if there's a shirt which is not selling, is it that you don't have the right size? You might always buy large shirts, and you love that shirt. We know that you buy large shirts, but we're just out of the size. Or is it that the price is larger than the competitors? That can be spidered, 20% more expensive than competitors. That's why I'm not buying it. Or is the color wrong? Last year's color, oh my God. Or is it, the fashion, whatever it is. So coming to the specific action here is, from a customer perspective, what Amazon tries to bake into that equation. There are many other perspectives. You could look at the analysis on the audience, the associate, basket, country, customer, household, item, lawyer, manufacturer, register, shelf, store, supply, and truck. You can look at the equation from the single banana and see how that banana travels through the world. But the perspective I find most useful really is this customer-centric perspective. and the customer is a connected individual. What does that mean? So we talked about the data, we talked about the equation of business, now we're talking some conclusions. One, it means that the conversations are not between the company and the customer. I got a letter from Fidelity, and it said on the outside, a conversation with a fund manager. I've never talked to the guy. It's just this old style trying to pull the wool over my head. The conversations are between the consumers. Second, there's a shift of mindset, which goes from an audience to the connected individual, and that actually has implications about identity, about thinking about who we are. Who are you? Who are you?
Depends on who's asking.
Okay. So many people would say their name or some attributes about the person. 25-year-old Indian subcontinent male, highly educated, whatever it is. Or are we moving from we are the people we are connected with? We're the people, back to the tomato farmer, who we work with, who we produce stuff with. In the past, that wasn't really observable. The past, passports actually not that old. They're just a bit over 100 years old. It was a piece of paper which said who we are. Now, we have, all the social interactions between individuals becoming observable. So I would say we moved from an e-business where we digitize the products, companies in the center, moving towards the customers, to me-commerce, where the individual is in the center, telling companies what he's interested in. I would like to spend 5 days on the beach with that person who lives in New York, so make me some offers. Whatever beach it is, let's see where we can optimize our time. Versus, I'm buying a specific ticket on United and, hope that, things will work out. And from there, from e-business, we move to me-business. We're now moving to we-business, where it is really the connection between people, which matters. So it's not that the focus on the nodes in the graph, if you will, but the connections on the connections, the focus on the connections in the graph, the relationships, the edges, as graph theorists put that. New business models emerge from that. This data ecosystem we have talked about, but disrupting through data goes from Uber, sidecar, relay rights, all the way to Airbnb and other places. They wouldn't exist if we didn't have the visibility into who the people are. I mean, would you have some random person you know nothing about stay over in your guest bedroom? Or equally, would you stay over in some random person's guest bedroom you know nothing about? Probably not. So to summarize, I think there are 3 data rules I want to give you. And we have a lunch table on big data, whoever wants to join me there. First one is start with the question you have, not with the data. You will fail in this world of data growing exponentially if you always wait for all the data be in. It won't work. So start with the question and then go to the data. Second, focus on the decisions and the actions you can take, not on the insight, knowledge, and wisdom you can obtain from the data. So it's really not data, given data, what actions can I take, but given a choice of actions, what data do I get? The third one is base the fitness functions you have onto your customers, not on your lawyers or accountants. And sometimes I add a 4th rule, which is let computers do what computers are good at, but let people do what people are good at. I would now like to open up here for questions, and I want to actually start with 2 questions myself, just to put them in the back of your mind. One is, do the people you work with actually know why you're asking them for data? Do they know what it is that they can exchange, that they get in exchange for sharing data with you? And 2, Does your system, your product, your app, your service get better with data, better with time, or maybe is it just a pain as more data come in to deal with it?